Hello, everybody. My name is Rhett Martino, back again with Progress America Unfiltered with Jocelyn McCurdy-Keats and Tyler Brockington to unpack what is going on in these United States of America. And right now, we are looking at issues like taxes. We are looking at what's going on in Arizona with the Senate and also Alec Baldwin. So to kick things off, I'm going to pass it over to Tyler, who is going to unpack all of the latest tax stuff that's going on in Washington, D.C. Tyler, what is up with all these tax things I've been hearing about?
Rhett, I am so glad you asked. So let's talk about everybody's favorite topic, taxes. So the GOP just released a plan being pushed by Kevin McCarthy, which is going to be, shocker, another giant handout to the wealthy and to their wealthy donors and corporations. So they're calling it the fair tax legislation. Spoiler alert, it is anything but fair. And it proposes eliminating the IRS completely, like as an organization. It also proposes eliminating the entire United States tax code that currently exists, including the dedicated funding for Social Security and Medicare. It would also abolish corporate income tax, the individual income tax, which is mostly paid by wealthier Americans, the estate tax, which is paid by couples worth over 25 million, and payroll taxes, which is what finances most of Social Security and Medicare. That's a lot. So let's just pause there. Okay. The elimination of the entire IRS, the elimination of all of these taxes that our government essentially depends on. And to replace the lost revenue from all of these taxes, they would instead institute a 30% federal sales tax on everything that you buy. Okay. I don't know how either of you feel about this, but I'm not loving the sounds of this so far.
Well, I feel like it's a good rule that if extreme right-wingers want something, we should be suspicious.
Absolutely. Absolutely. The first thing, you already had me at GOP tax plan. I already don't love that idea. So, and it's important to note that this is a continuation on the Republican agenda. I mean, Donald Trump proposed eliminating Social Security and Medicare's dedicated revenue during the pandemic, okay, during a time when millions of Americans were depending on these payments. So it's not shocking to see that they're doing this, but it's still disappointing. And here is why. First of all, the richer you are, the lesser percentage of your money you spend in general. So consumption taxes, like a sales tax, are going to be disproportionate to the percentage of total income for lower and middle income people. So, for example, a billionaire is going to be paying the same amount of taxes, the same rate of tax as a teacher, a firefighter, a truck driver, a nurse. Like, make that make sense. It literally doesn't. I feel like I need somebody, one of the producers, to drop in the chat if this is correct. But, I just finished grad school. And in grad school, I think we learned this is like a regressive tax or something where it impacts people disproportionately to your income. So we don't like that. We don't want that. Thank you to my degree. Anyway, another reason this is terrible is that it makes tax avoidance a lot easier. So basically, if you're only paying sales tax on the things that you purchase, it creates a really big incentive for cash payments so that you can avoid a paper trail, right? If you're paying with cash, it's a lot easier to avoid that sales tax. And then guess what? If they abolish the IRS, there's literally no one there to catch anybody cheating. So we hate that. And guess who has copious amount of cash on hand to avoid taxes? I'll give you a hint.
Rich people.
Yeah, it's rich people. Exactly. And as a reminder, this would be a 30% increase on pretty much everything we buy. So groceries, your car, your house, your rent. Do you want your landlord to increase your rent by 30%? Apparently, Republicans do. So that's a very popular partisan stance. And there are some experts that are saying that it would actually take a national sales tax between 30 to 60% on all goods and services to make up for abolishing the federal income that would come from payroll taxes, estate taxes, gift taxes, etc. So needless to say, we don't like that. And this is coming at a time when inflation is already super high. Gas prices are going up again. Saw it on the news. Eggs cost about as much as the federal minimum wage right now. So it's really important to keep in mind that this is not going to be good for the American people. And it only abolishes federal income taxes. There would still be state taxes. So people are going to would be paying a lot more out of pocket if this were to come to fruition. And really quick to wrap this up, the White House made a statement saying that these tax cuts would disproportionately benefit the wealthy. As we know, the top 0.1% of Americans would get tax cuts that averaged $110,000 per year. That's a tax cut that exceeds what the average American household annually makes in a year, okay? So they're getting tax cuts of people's entire salaries. There's just no world where that makes sense as a financial basis for an entire country and an entire government. And so the bottom line, Republicans are again conspiring to concentrate wealth in the hands of their rich buddies. We know this. They literally do this at every turn. And this bill would be a tax cut for the wealthy and a tax hike on working people, and we will not stand for it.
Well, and I think that there really is a dynamic where we're starting to see extreme wealth as a form of violence, but it's getting worse faster than we can communicate to people how violent this really is.
Absolutely.
Like, we have all these people that are just accruing massive amounts of capital and then straight up buying neighborhoods. Something like, I can't even remember, it was like 25% of new home purchases are by hedge funds. That number actually might be low. But then, of course, it's inflating what things cost for the rest of us. 50
Absolutely.
American major cities have a median home cost of $1 million. A median home cost, not an average. Like, it just blows my mind. Why don't you all think people are angrier, honestly?
I don't know. I think there's a lot of like misconceptions about taxes. And I think, listen, I'm a 27-year-old girl. I'm out here on, H&R Block crying, doing my taxes right now. I've already started this week. So like, I get it. I hate taxes as much as the next person. Like, it's frustrating when you see how much is taken out of your paycheck, every month. And like most Americans, we're all like, one paycheck away, one disaster away from, homelessness essentially. But at the end of the day, I like having roads to drive on. I like putting into Social Security and Medicare that I will one day get to use as my earned benefits. I like knowing that we have a functioning government based on the contributions that I'm able to contribute, because we live in a society, and it's not fair that Republicans are proposing a plan that would put an undue burden on the members of that society that don't make as much as their rich friends.
Yeah, so much of this conversation reminds me of in conversations of like student debt, etc., when we're thinking about how young people cannot afford to buy a home, as Jocelyn outlined for us so clearly. It's like, back when our parents were our age, they were home buying in like their 20s or 30s. Now it's like a miracle if we can go buy a box of eggs at the grocery store. So it's just incredibly wild to think about how far inflation has gone, how far this like growing disconnect has been between the top 1%, the middle class, and like that growing divide that has impacted so many people.
Yeah. And if Republicans have their way, it'll be a much longer time before you can get a home once you add that 30% sales tax onto it. But
oh, joy.
I know. That's something fun we can think about for another day that we hopefully won't have to worry about anytime soon, thanks to the democratically controlled Senate. But speaking of the Senate, Rhett, what news do you have for me about Arizona?
Yeah, so the Arizona Senate race is looking fascinating to say the least. So we have Senator Kyrsten Sinema, who recently changed her political party from Democratic to Independent for a variety of reasons, but she has stood out against the Democratic Party and has been like kind of a thorn in the side of all things progress in the United States Senate, standing up against things like the filibuster, standing up against healthcare reform, etc. But part of the reason that we know that Kyrsten Sinema is after this is because we know she can read a poll. Data for Progress has shown that she was drawing less than 20% in a Democratic Party, no matter who challenged her. So it's almost like if you can't win there, change the rules of the game. So she flipped her party to Independent, and now we have a contestant that is challenging her for her Senate seat should she choose to run. Ruben Gallego announced this week that he is running to be Arizona's next Democratic senator. Ruben Gallego is the son of immigrants. He is a strong progressive in the United States House of Representatives. He is a working class individual. He is somebody that has dealt with things like student debt. He has a history of military service. This is becoming a great candidate for the United States Senate. And like complete contrast to Senator Kyrsten Sinema, who has literally ran from the duties that Arizonans have elected her to do. Arizona is becoming an increasingly Democratic state. And Kyrsten Sinema just like ran away from that. She was like, I see what y'all want. Let me pack up my kit, head out and and not meet the needs of what y'all want. So it's just so confusing. But that's just kind of the ongoing trend for Kyrsten Sinema is like, she wants to be like Joe Manchin or something. Like, what do you all think about this?
I think it's like, I'm sorry. The reason she has to be the most hated woman in Washington, if you have an iota of common sense, because she's the worst type of person who gets elected based on her queerness and her womanness and her alleged feminism, turns around and sells out not just her constituents, but all of us.
Yes.
Like, why are we hanging on this woman's every like nuanced word? And will she give us health care? Will she do the right thing for the climate? Like, first of all, it's a comment on our system that any one member can have that much power. But regardless, she knows what she's doing.
Absolutely. And I also think it's important to remember, like, she doesn't seem to particularly like her job. She hasn't held a town hall in Arizona, and we'll correct if this is wrong, but I believe it's been like 2 years since she's actually faced her constituents. So doesn't really seem like, oh yeah, since she's been elected, she hasn't held a town hall in her state. So it doesn't seem like she's really gunning to even hear from the people of Arizona, let alone represent them. And we've seen that in the partisan, and it's weird because they're not even partisan games, but the weird political theater that she's been doing in Washington. And I will say, Ruben Gallego's video was just truly, it was really moving to me. And I wasn't really expecting it to be. I don't know what I was expecting, but highly recommend that you watch the launch video if you haven't had a chance.
The rich and the powerful, they don't need more advocates. It's the people that are still trying to decide between groceries and utilities that needs a fighter for them. There is no lobbyist for working families. We could argue different ways about how to do it, but at the core, if you're more likely to be meeting with the powerful than the powerless, you're doing this job incorrectly.
So it seems like Senator Kyrsten Sinema is, standing up for the filibuster, being this one person that's just kind of the voice of agony in the United States Senate, because it's all this audition to be, center stage, be in the limelight, be in national news, so she can maybe become a lobbyist after she loses / drops out of the Senate race. Like, what do you all think about that? It kind of seems like Senator Sinema is auditioning to kind of sell out people more and just work for corporations.
I mean, 100%. I think the word global elites gets thrown around a lot, but there's a reason. There's just this increasingly terrifying rush upward of people from this position power to that one, whether it's Wall Street to the White House or the Senate to K Street. And it should terrify all of us because these people do not play by the rules that you and I do. And that's something that I feel like working class and middle class people are not understanding. Like, you can make $250,000 and you're still not an elite by those standards.
Yeah.
And all of this Sinema stuff is her trying to join that ultra elite club. Like, tell me I'm wrong.
No, you're so right. And I think it's very obvious due to her, clapping and high-fiving in front of her rich buddies with Manchin and stalling, key votes on things that Democrats actually care about, that, she's not here to help people. But at the same time, it's still pretty, sad to see. And hopefully we can get somebody like Gallego in that seat who will actually work for Arizonans, because, let's get one thing straight. I'm no mathematician, but there's just no way she wins this seat. She's extremely unpopular. Data for Progress has released a lot of polling, and she pretty much wins against nobody. But it will really turn into, if this becomes a three-way race, which it likely will be, between Sinema, a Democrat, probably Gallego, and then a Republican, her staying in the race could hurt Gallego or the Democrats' chance of holding this seat. And it could be given to a Republican by even as little as a 1-point margin. So I do think we're going to have to investigate the depths of her selfishness. But I think as long as she's got her billionaire buddies, there's a chance that she could be willing to kind of ruin this for everyone if she doesn't get her way, which is a bummer. And she is more popular with Republicans than Democrats. So we can see how that might shake out in terms of the race. But as an independent, it's going to be harder for her to get on a ballot. So I think we're really going to see how much she wants to continue not doing her job for Arizonans.
Yeah, after you, Jocelyn.
No, I mean, because I think she's like done her job for herself, you know?
Mm,
And that's the thing. I think we as Americans need to be hyper cognizant of the fact that, like, when these people are talking, they're not talking to us. They're talking to the billionaires that will throw money and power at them, whether or not they're in office.
yeah.
And I feel like that is like the conversation with her. People are like, oh, like, she's making everyone mad. She's making us mad, but the people that she's trying to please, she's making very happy.
Hmm. I could not agree
Absolutely.
more. And I think also, like, what is so frustrating about Senator Sinema for the people of Arizona, and I think also just in national politics too, is I think we like to believe that when politicians act out in this way, you know, for their rich and powerful friends, for their own interests, that there is a ballot box that can hold them accountable, that the voters can hold them accountable. And it seems in many ways that she's running from that by switching her party to independent, by possibly being a third vote splitting person in this race for Arizona Senate in the upcoming election year. Like, it
Yeah.
almost seems like she's running from accountability in that way. It's like running from accountability, leaving Arizonans in the past, running towards the corporate greed. Like, it's just like eyes on the money for her. And it's so disappointing because what she's leaving behind are things like healthcare, voting rights, all these things that are so essential to the American people.
You hit the nail on the head with that one. And I think we're going to see her running for a long time. It's important to keep in mind that I think the Democratic primary for this race isn't even until August of 2024. So we've got a really, really long time to see how this shakes out. And I'm sure we're going to see some more shenanigans and have more to talk about from Sinema. But for now, we can leave it at that. And let's take a huge tone shift and talk about the movie Rust, Alec Baldwin, and the importance of unions. So, Rhett, I know that you've got union members in your family and you know a lot about this. So, can you tell us what's going on the movie set of Rust?
In 2021, on the set of Rust, we saw Alec Baldwin shoot and kill cinematographer Helena Hutchins. And since then, we've really heard a lot of conversation just about the importance of unions and trained professionals on the sets of these movies when they're utilizing things like dangerous weapons, dangerous sets, etc. And this is an issue that hits really close to home for me. My father's in the IATSE union, which is International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees of San Francisco. Definitely forgot what the acronym stood for. Sorry, Dad.
Those
But
acronyms
these
are always
unions,
so long.
They
I
really
know.
are.
I'm like, yeah, I just like know it as IATSE. And so it's IATSE. My dad's in that. And that's kind of the union that's at the center of this whole story. So what's really important, I think, as kind of outlining the facts of this case are we saw union members on the set of Rust, but they were complaining about things like having a 13-hour workday and then having to drive home after that. And kind of just the unsafe conditions of that, like operating a vehicle after being on your feet all day. And so after these union members left the set, they were replaced by non-union members. So these are called scab armors on the ranch. And this shooting took place after the union members left, and it was just the non-union members on set. And I think it's really important to note how these unions really support the proper training and the safety training of people on sets of movies. This is a really fast-paced environment where injuries may likely occur. And having people on the set to kind of train, to provide best practices is a really good way to help support people and to prevent them from injuring themselves. But also, these unions are incredibly great with things like healthcare benefits, with other benefits as well, in the case that anything does go wrong. So these unions are a real safeguard for people in these really fast-paced environments. And yeah, I just want to like turn it over to you two. So like, what do you think about all this talk about unions on movie sets, unions in general? Like, what do you think this puts us in the broader conversation of like unions, etc., when we think about how people are being supported by them?
Well, I think it's like really important to remember that work is dangerous and life is dangerous. And this conversation, you're so right, Rhett. Like, we don't think of movies as a high risk environment. And I think that really does generalize outward to so many labor issues. Like, okay, I worked in restaurants for like 10 years, and it is so easy to injure yourself seriously, and service workers have like no recourse and no protection. So like, yeah, I'm glad that somebody's going to be held accountable, or I hope somebody's going to be held accountable, because a workplace without unions is going to leave people very vulnerable to really horrible, tragic things.
I totally agree. And I do think, like you said, like nobody expects to go to work and not come home that day. I think it's a huge tragedy that unfortunately does underscore the importance of unions. And I think this particular tragedy comes at a really interesting time for the labor movement right now. We're obviously seeing huge unionization efforts in a lot of major companies like Apple and Starbucks and Amazon that are having huge pushes for the labor movement for their safety and their rights and protections. And I think this is obviously an extreme example of the importance of unions. And I was reading into the case a little bit today, and it's really like a worst case scenario of everything that could go wrong in terms of people being overworked, safety protocols being ignored, and then the fact that it ended in the tragic loss of a life. And I think that's something that can't be overlooked. So I totally agree with you. I think that whether you're a rail worker, a cinematographer, a barista, a waiter, you deserve rights. You deserve to be represented by a union, and you deserve to feel safe in your place of employment. So yeah, I think I'm interested to see how this is handled. I think that the judge in this case seems to be taking it very seriously and is not going to, make special concessions because it happens to involve an A-list actor. I also think it's important to note, I just read this, that it looks like they are going to start filming again if they haven't already. They had plans to resume filming for the production this month in January. So interested to see if lessons have been learned, but hopefully there's some justice for the family in this case, and that future productions and unions can learn from this.
Exactly. And I think also just kind of, realizing that Alec Baldwin, who we all know, as you said, Tyler, is an A-list celebrity, was working with non-union members. Alec Baldwin himself belongs to the Screen Actors Guild. I should also note that they have come out in support of him, saying that actors should not know if that it's not the actor's responsibility to know if the firearm was live, which I can definitely understand that part of the argument. But I think it's also just important to note broadly, like, this is an A-list celebrity who is working with non-union members who he himself was in a union or is in a union.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it does seem that he is heavily involved in the circumstances around this active round being fired. He, wanted to go off schedule and shoot something that wasn't supposed to be shot with a different gun than was supposed to be used because I can't remember, I think he is like a producer, or he has some kind of, yeah, he's a producer on this as well. So it's more than just, he's just an actor showing up. He does have a role of influence here. And a lot of the weird circumstance around this was a lot of last minute changes and going against the schedule and things that were a union present probably would not have allowed to happen because, there's a reason that you have a schedule. There's a reason you have these protocols in place. And it's so things like this don't happen.
Absolutely.
All right. That's all we have for today. Thank you so much, Rhett. Thank you so much, Jocelyn. And we'll see you guys next time here at Progress America Unfiltered.